Hi, class. So, in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about why exactly the United States ends up declaring war on Germany and joining World War One. So, as we entered into 1917, the United States had been able to maintain its policy of neutrality, right, in World War One. And in fact, President Wilson had just won a re-election based on the platform that he kept us out of war. And to a large degree, he was able to keep the United States out of war because the German Empire had pulled back from its unrestricted submarine warfare. After the sinking of the Lusitania and how angered America had become, they said, okay, look, we're not going to attack passenger vessels anymore. We're only going to attack things that are definitely British non passenger vessels, right? But as we go into January 1917, the British blockade on the Central Powers was starting to really have an effect. And the Central Powers were getting desperate, in particular Germany, especially. And so they're eager to essentially do the same thing to the British, right? They want to make the British feel the pain. And once again, they go with the unrestricted submarine warfare. But the Germans knew that if they were going to go back to this policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, that it's likely that the United States would enter the war on the side of the Allies. Remember, they had promised and apologized and promised the United States they would not do this, and they're going to go back on their word. So, knowing that that was likely to happen, they said, well, how could we slow the US down given they're going to probably join the war against us? And the thinking was, well, maybe we could somehow enlist the help of Mexico, which at the time was not on the best of terms with the United States. Remember from last week when we were talking about the Mexican Revolution and US involvement in that? So there was already tensions there, and the Germans wanted to take advantage of this. And so Arthur Zimmermann, who was the German foreign secretary, which is the equivalent of the United States Secretary of State. So he's the one in charge of negotiating and talking with other countries. And so the foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, he sends an encoded telegram to the Mexicans. So encoded means that it wasn't just like he wrote a typical letter. It was, he used a code to try to secretly pass on information to the Mexicans. And it's encoded especially because it has to go over lines that are controlled by the Americans. And in this telegram, he actually proposes an alliance to slow the Americans down. So this is what he wrote. So this is a coded telegram. And then it was actually intercepted by British intelligence and decoded and then shared with the Americans. And then that was also then made public to the American public. And so this is why it's fascinating to actually read this stuff. So this is January 1917. This is the Germans talking to the Mexicans. It says, we intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. We shall endeavor, in spite of this, to keep the United States of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, we make Mexico a proposal of alliance on the following basis: make war together, make peace together, generous financial support, and understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The settlement in detail is left to you. You will inform the president, and they're talking about the president of Mexico here, of the above most secretly as soon as the outbreak of war with the United States of America is certain. And add the suggestion that he should, on his own initiative, right, his own initiative, invite Japan to immediate adherence and at the same time mediate between Japan and ourselves. Please call the president's attention to the fact that the ruthless employment of our submarines now offers the prospect of compelling England in a few months to make peace. Signed, Zimmermann. Now, the Mexicans, when they read this, they really didn't take it too seriously. They didn't think that they could seriously engage the United States in a war. They couldn't seriously take back or occupy these territories. They didn't have the manpower, the weapons, the military power that it would require. So they didn't really think much of this. The real effect, though, of this telegram was to make the American public angry. They were going to go back into the unrestricted submarine warfare. That's what the Germans are announcing, and the Germans themselves talk about, ruthless employment of the submarines. So when people talk about what were the causes, what brought the United States into war, the ones that are typically cited are the unrestricted submarine warfare, the sinking of the Lusitania, the Zimmerman telegram that was trying to get Mexico to somehow get into a war with the US and reclaim these territories is another one. And as we'll see a few months after this, the US actually does declare war on Germany and enter into World War I. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So, again, despite the fact that Wilson had just won re-election in 1916 based on a platform of keeping the United States out of war, by April of 1917, President Wilson and his government, his administration, had decided that Germany had gone too far, and in particular had gone too far with the unrestricted submarine warfare. So this right over here on the right is a picture of President Wilson on April 2nd, 1917, giving a war message to Congress as to why the United States needs to declare war on Germany. And April 4th, Congress passes the resolution to declare war. So just 2 days later. And then the president approves it on April 6th. So by early April, the United States was at war with Germany, which is a good time to start thinking about, why did all of this happen? Now, the things that are typically cited, and these are things that are inflamed public opinion in the US, and that many of which were cited by President Woodrow Wilson. And in this lesson, right, I'm going to also put the entire text of President Wilson's speech, which I really recommend reading so that you can see all the things that President Wilson cited in his speech. But just as a summary of that, the things that tend to get cited most often are the unrestricted submarine warfare on the part of Germany. And particular cases, or the most cited example of that, is the sinking of the Lusitania. The Germans had to stop doing that for a little under 2 years. They had done it. They had stopped. But then, as we enter into 1917, they began doing it again, unrestricted submarine warfare. And it also made the Americans quite angry to realize that the Germans were trying to incite the Mexicans against them. So you have the Zimmerman telegram. Zimmerman telegram is also a reason that the Wilson administration and why people in general were fairly angry about things. Now, on top of that, there were atrocities committed by the Germans in their march through Belgium. So keep in mind that Belgium was the first country invaded by Germany, right, at the very beginning of the war. And as the Germans marched through Belgium, as they were trying to execute on the Schlieffen Plan, which was their plan for how to win the war, so they committed atrocities, Belgian atrocities. And these were earlier, like I said, in 1914, which these atrocities made many Americans not like what's going on. So Belgian atrocities. And to put on top of that, the British were able to leverage the Belgian atrocities to execute a fairly effective propaganda campaign in America. So the British were able to take advantage of those atrocities and make Americans outraged through propaganda. Now, on top of that, and this is something that Wilson speaks very strongly about in his speech, is the notion of fighting for democracy. And what you have here in the First World War, the Central Powers, you're talking about the German Empire, you're talking about the Austro-Hungarians. These are monarchies. These are emperors who are controlling these countries. And even though the UK, the United Kingdom, was nominally a kingdom, it was really a democracy, right? They had a parliament, at least for those who could vote, right? We're not talking about the entire British Empire, but the UK itself is functionally, it's a democracy. It's democratic. And so was France, and so was the Third French Republic. So there's this argument that the United States is fighting for the representation of people, the fighting for democracy. Now, there's a more cynical argument that some people have made, and I think it's reasonable to give that some attention. And one of those cynical arguments, or one of the more cynical arguments, is that the US had close financial and trade ties to Britain, not to mention cultural ties. So, financial ties to the British. On top of that, you had very successful British propaganda. One talking about the atrocities in Belgium, which did actually happen, right? They claimed the British were able to exploit this as a propaganda machine, so successful propaganda. But they also spread rumors that after the sinking of the Lusitania, that the Germans had their school children out there celebrating the sinking, and these were all made up propaganda. And then more cynical view of why the US entered the war, and this is true of probably most wars, is that there was a lot of lobbying on the part of war profiteers. In fact, in Little Orphan Annie, if you've seen that before, Daddy Warbucks, the reason why his last name is Warbucks is because he made his fortune as a war profiteer during World War One. And war profiteers, these are people who might be selling arms or weapons to the Allies, or who might sell arms to the US government if the US were to get into a war that might somehow supply the troops. And it includes potentially folks on Wall Street, right? Financiers who worked on Wall Street. There were significant lending to the Allies, and mainly the Allies, not the Central Powers. And so the view is, if the Allies win, those loans are going to be made good, right? So we had loaned money to the Allies, and if they win, then they'll be able to pay them back, and the loans will be a good investment. And I would look at I have posted the entire text from Senator George Norris, who was one of 5 senators, actually one of 6 senators, to vote against the resolution to go to war. There were 50 representatives who also voted against it. And this is a little excerpt, but I want you to also take a look, if you can, read the full text of his speech. And I highly, highly recommend reading that along with Wilson's text of his speech to Congress in his war message. But I'll just read this part because it does, I think, point out that the US from the beginning did have biases that were more pro-British. And so this is part of his speech. The reason given by the president in asking Congress to declare war against Germany is that the German government has declared certain war zones within which, by the use of submarines, she sinks without notice American ships and destroys American lives. The first war zone was declared by Great Britain. She gave us and the world notice of it on the 4th day of November 1914. The zone became effective November 5th, 1914. This zone, so declared by Great Britain, covered the whole of the North Sea. The first German war zone was declared on the 4th day of February 1915, just 3 months after the British war zone was declared. Germany gave 15 days' notice of the establishment of her zone, which became effective on the 18th day of February 1915. The German war zone covered the English Channel and the high sea waters around the British Isles. It is unnecessary to cite authority to show that both of these orders declaring military zones were illegal and contrary to international law. It is sufficient to say that our government has officially declared both of them to be illegal and has officially protested against both of them. The only difference is that, in the case of Germany, we have persisted in our protest, while in the case of England, we have submitted. And I really encourage you once again to read the text of both Wilson's speech and Senator Norris's speech, and come to your own conclusions of what really might have been the reasons why we got into World War One. Why did we get involved? And it could have been a little bit of both, right? That we were biased towards Britain from the very beginning. We had financial interests in their success in the war because we had loaned them money. And it could also mean that at the same time, we did want to spread democracy. We did side with the democracies of France and the UK over the monarchies of the German Empire and the Austrian Empire. So it could be both. It might just be one. But I want to know what you think. Of all the reasons that we've gone over, why do you think the U.S. decided to declare of the reasons why the U.S. decided to declare war on Germany, Of those, which one do you think was the most significant, and why do you think that? So let me know what you think, and let me know if you have any questions.